So you guys have a thing called DWI Impact. Do I have the name right?
The name of the organization is Impact DWI, which is a nonprofit that's been around since 1999. And what we do is teach a DWI Victim Impact Panel. And what a Victim Impact Panel is it's a bunch of people who have had very bad experiences with alcohol or with driving under the influence of alcohol. And remember, DWI means driving while impaired in New Mexico. And alcohol is typically what is impairing people when they're driving.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt. I'm genuinely curious about this. Where are we at with marijuana?
Marijuana is another form of impairment.
Obviously.
So marijuana may be legal to buy and to use.
Well, so is liquor, but
you cannot drive under the influence of marijuana.
Is there a roadside test for weed?
The roadside test for weed is the same standard field sobriety test.
I see.
And then there are blood tests for weed. The law enforcement is just still figuring out how to enforce.
Can they draw blood? Or do they take you downtown and they can draw blood?
Under some circumstances, they can draw blood, but I don't believe it can typically be done if there wasn't a serious crash injury or if it's a fourth or higher DWI arrest.
There are problems with this because weed stays in your system longer than alcohol and all that. Alcohol's gone in 3 days, probably. A person can be under the influence if there is a test a day or two later after using. So, look, it's not all put together yet.
Yeah. We're all still, everybody's learning how to do that. And there isn't a field test, like a saliva test, for marijuana. And maybe there will be someday. So it's just all...
As you said before we turn on the mics, this is America. As soon as somebody monetizes an instant weed check, it'll be everywhere. Bill, I've known you well for years, and tell me about your... Well, I'll go ahead and use the word sponsee that you worked with closely for years and his story. Give us the headlines on that.
Yeah. First of all, I had 2 DWIs in the 60s.
Well, you had to work at it to get pinched in the 60s.
Yeah. No, I didn't spend a lot of time anywhere except in court with a lecture, maybe. But I had an accident when I was drunk in Seattle, and I've been in a blackout. And to this day, I don't know how I got there.
Yeah. I
had to buy a map. So anyway, I had a DWI and ran into the back end of a car, and there were 4 old people in the car. And so my daughter was injured. She was 6 years old. The people in the car were injured. Going forward to a few years ago, I was at an AA meeting, and a young man identified as having a DWI with problems coming up. My intuition said, why don't you offer to sponsor this guy? And so we met at a grocery store where there were booths to have coffee and all that.
Right.
And he said, look, I'm facing a big problem here. He said, I had a DWI, but I had a fatality. 1 woman was killed and 2 people were injured. So he said, I'm facing a court situation. And
he's a young fella, right? How old is he?
He was 18 years old.
Oh, man.
And
could have been me.
Yeah, could have been me, and was me with an accident years before. The 2 of us could relate. He was 18 and I was 81. And so I began to sponsor him in AA. And we went to meetings regularly. He was going to outpatient treatment. He had good support from his dad and his mom. So family was okay with him. And, I spent a lot of time. I took him to work. He had a job, a responsible kid. He went to the master's program here at community college. And his story was like mine as a kid, as a young people a young person drinking and not giving it up and saying, "Oh, I can do that too. I can
Shit,
do
Bill,
what's
it was
over."
it was legal for me. I came up in Texas where the drinking age was 18, and you could drink and drive. There were limits, but you could have a beer in your lap and you could blow a whatever, a 4 or a 5, and you were okay.
Wow.
Insane. Another planet. And that was liberally enforced. I didn't know anybody that had DWIs back then. It was a different planet.
What is it? 8%?
No, I think that's right. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
If you blow an 8, you're
Yeah.
pinched. Yeah.
Blowing 8, and he blew 23. So, I mean, he was really in a blackout from La Bajada down to the exit by San Felipe Pueblo.
Yeah. Right. That's like driving down a mountain if you don't know the area. Yeah.
Yeah. So he then was sentenced in December of 2017. That's the year that this all took place. I'd worked with him from March of 2017, and he was sentenced and a plea bargain to 9 years in prison and 9 years probation parole combo. December of 2017, he went to prison, and he went to the prison in Grants, and was there. And subsequently, his mom and his dad and I would drive over to visit him on visiting days at Grants. So it was a combination of the outside guy, the old guy, mom and dad, and the support was good.
Okay. Well, you use the word impact. There's the other half of this story. The victims of his drunk driving. How do you guys interact with that part of the puzzle?
What we do is we organize, it's a couple-hour session. We do it once a month, and every other month we'll do it in Spanish because we have people who get DWIs who only speak Spanish.
Of course.
We just get people to get up and tell their stories. This young man that Bill just talked about is one of the people. He tells his story about what Bill said about going to prison, what it was like in prison. Now he's been out a year or so. He's got a job. He's trying to rebuild a family and whatnot. So the story has a positive end, but it was a horrible experience for him to go through. But you ask about the victims. And we also, in addition to having people like this young man who was an offender, DWI offender, we have people who were the victims. One of our individuals, a lady named Margaret, talks about how her 2 children were driving home from one of them's job, and somebody crossed the yellow lines all the way across to the other side and ran into them head on, killing her 15-year-old daughter and seriously injuring her 17-year-old son who was driving. And this individual, it turned out, was impacted by marijuana. And Margaret just talked about what it was like to go to the hospital, to go and see your dead daughter laying on the table and whatnot, and how her life has never been the same as a result of that happening. I talk about my own personal story.
Yeah.
When I was 8 years old, I just learned how to ride a bicycle. And I was riding the bicycle down the residential street in my neighborhood. And unknown to me, there was a guy who had a bunch of beers at a bar and was late. And he was racing to get across town to see his wife and his ex-wife now and kids because they just separated. And he was in a hurry and he wasn't paying attention. And he didn't see me on the bicycle. 30, 40 miles an hour, he slammed into the back of my bicycle. You could see the indentation of his bumper going a foot into the wheel of my bicycle. I went over the handlebars. It didn't have any of those plastic grips on it. It was just a metal pipe, and it ripped my throat open. And I was laying in the street bleeding to death. And he stopped the car and got out and looked, but he didn't know what to do. And fortunately, a police officer came from the other direction, and he knew how to put pressure on my neck to stop the bleeding until the paramedics got there. But, I just always think about how horrible it must have felt for that man to see this 8-year-old kid dying because he was in too much of a hurry and it stopped at the bar. and he didn't know what to do. And we have other people who have stories like that. One of our volunteers talks about her sister who got a DWI, but her sister's real story was that she couldn't give up alcohol.
Right.
And she got cirrhosis of the liver and she couldn't give up alcohol. And the young lady who tells the story, the sister just simply tells about being there with her sister and the 5 kids.
Yeah, 5
as
kids.
the sister dies in the hospital down in Albuquerque. And how the sister with the cirrhosis just thought she'd go to sleep one night and not wake up. But it turned out that it took many days of extreme pain before she finally passed. We have another story of a young woman who was in a really bad relationship, and she and her ex-boyfriend had a fight, and she grabbed her daughter. They'd been drinking, got in the car and drove, and the police pulled her over. And she not only got a DWI, she got felony child abuse for having her daughter in the car. And the daughter was taken away from her. She said she got to see her daughter speak for the first time when she was being sentenced in court. So, and she fought to get her daughter back, and it took a lot of work. And she went through the drug court program. But it's just, the whole drinking while impaired, it has such tremendous impacts on people's lives, and nobody tells these stories because nobody's very proud of them. And consequently, all the people who are out there drinking and driving, thinking nothing bad's going to happen to them, don't really get to hear the story about how something bad can happen.
I drank like a fish in my teens and 20s, and I got sober at age 32. It was easy to be glib and say, well, if I kept that up, I'd be dead by now from drinking and driving. Well, I'm 64 now, and someone near and dear to me that I look over the breakfast table at is a nurse at the hospital 3 miles from where we're sitting. She's constantly exposed to cirrhosis cases and people that did keep the party rolling another 10 or 20 or 30 years. It might have been, I don't know, an exaggeration or something to say that I was killing myself with booze. But if you keep it up for your whole life and the liver blows out, it's no fucking joke. The details of somebody's descent into the last chapters when liquor's been part of their story for decades. It's because of my job here at the Friendship Club and because of my access to horror stories from the hospital down the street. I get exposed to daily, I'm using the word stories, but the reality of this disease. And in every direction, I know what addiction is like. I know what it's like when it's got its hooks in you and nothing's more important. It's like breathing air. And somebody who's driving down the street having a nice day and somebody crosses the line and heads into them and cuts their family in half in an instant. How do you guys get overwhelmed? Do you have to take a break from this? What's it like when you're exposed to this stuff every day?
Let me just say it first. When I was working with a young man, I took him to the DWI impact panel, and he spoke 2 times. And I got hooked on the DWI impact panel. I go to it every month as a visitor, as a volunteer, as a speaker, if they want me to add something to, because I've had 2 DWIs and I had one with an accident and injuries and all of that. I thought that I was bulletproof. I had been drinking since I was 6 years old. I had 2 shots out of a pint of 3 Feathers whiskey, and I taught the neighborhood kids how to smoke and drink and all of that. And I didn't have that accident until I was 40. But I mean, I'm doing everything. Okay. I had a career. I was married. I had a child. I was doing all the things that they write about, about the perfect life. And then I had that accident. Man, did that ever change me? Were
you one and done? No. You had 2 DWIs.
Yeah, early ones. Yeah. One came with a lecture from the judge after he sentenced me to the maximum penalty in California. At that time, it was a $300 fine.
Oh my
You know, in
God.
the 60s.
Today it's a life ruiner. You are out of business.
No, really. And then, because there was no real strong penalty for a DWI with no incidents, just the DWI, he recessed court, made my lawyer and myself come into his chamber, and then he gave me a lecture. I worked for a bank. He said, "You've got no business doing that. You come here to the court in your three-piece suit and you talk back to the law officers and everything." That was about all they could do in those days.
Right. Well, now there's interlock is the word here in New Mexico. It's the thing you have to blow into to get your car to go. But I still hear stories of 8 DWIs, that kind of thing. How is that possible?
The enforcement varies in the different counties, and in the more rural counties, the enforcement isn't quite as extreme. And a lot of those 8 DWIs were before the law got tougher.
Okay.
The interlock's only been required, I think, since 2005. So you got a lot of people who've been drinking for 40 years and got DWIs in the past. And then you got people who don't get an interlock when they get a DWI. All they have to do is say to the judge, "I can't afford an interlock. I don't have a car. I'm not going to drive." The judge says, "Okay." He can't make you put an interlock into a car you don't have. Now
And
they borrow somebody else's car.
Do you know the term ghost car? I read this for the first time in the newspaper here a while back. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
The streets are full of them. Just people that get their hands on a car some kind of way, no insurance, no nothing. They're just floating around. And I'm not talking about 1 in a million. There are loads of these vehicles on the road.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Your Uncle Larry parked a pickup truck in a field a couple of years ago. You get it going, and there you are on the road. You're getting down the road some kind of way.
Well, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of cars like that.
A lot of them.
You know, the other thing we do at this panel is we give the people who got the DWIs a chance to speak. And it's really interesting to hear what they say, because they didn't go through these horrendous crashes. Many of them did, and a few of them did. I mean, about a month or two ago, when we asked somebody what happened to you in DWI, your crash, he stuck a stump of an arm up and said, "I had a crash and I lost my arm." A lot of them talk about losing their jobs, especially if they have commercial driver's licenses, and they lose their license because of it. But one of the stories that just blew me away, and I've heard this in several different versions, is one woman said she and her husband were going through a divorce, and they were having trouble agreeing to the property settlement. So he said, "Let's meet at this pizza place that we always met at, and we'll stay there until we get it done." So they went to the pizza place, they had pizza, they had a couple pitchers of beer, and they got it all done. And they said goodbye one last time. And as she walked down the steps to get in her car, he dialed 911 and reported her as a
Holy
drunk
crap.
driver.
Yes.
And people don't think when they're drinking in public and they go get out in the car, anybody who's got a grudge against them has just been given the ideal opportunity to create a whole bunch of pain for them.
Wow. I've called. I have no sense of humor about drunk driving. I've called I've called the cops. I don't know how it turned out, but I've done that. There was no dividing up divorce settlements at Pizza Hut beforehand. But if I see somebody waddling to their car and pulling away and they shouldn't be, I'll call the cops. I have no compunction in that way.
Yeah, but it's just, people don't really think, because when someone gets a lot of alcohol on board, they don't think anything's going to go wrong.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You're using your impaired judgment to decide whether or not you're still okay to drive or not.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Normal thinking.
Yeah.
To somebody that's drinking. Absolutely.
And the other one I got when the people were talking, this one woman said, "I used to think my driver's license picture looked horrible, but now when anybody Googles my name, they see my mugshot."
Whoa.
Yes.
And it follows you forever.
That's right. I've got my sponsor is an attorney, and he said, I kind of feel sorry for young people because nothing ever goes away. You and I, the three of us kind of remember the same presidents, and we know that if you waited long enough, it just kind of went away back in the day. And it's no longer the case. And with Google, yeah, I've got a weird name, and there's somebody with my exact name who did some horrible things and very publicly. So if you look up my name, that ain't me, fellas. I promise. I've barely ever had a speeding ticket, right or wrong. That's not my deal. The monthly meetings you're talking about, are they hybrid? Are they Zoom? Are they in person? What's the technical aspect?
They're Zoom. We did them in person until COVID.
Yeah.
We started doing them on Zoom afterward. We were able to go from just helping Santa Fe to helping the whole state of New Mexico. So we get people from all over the state attending these meetings.
And they get court credit.
Yeah, and they're required by the court. New Mexico law allows the court to say you have to attend this class. It's not a requirement. It's the judge's discretion, but almost all the judges require it. And
well, that's fantastic. How many people are on a meeting?
We typically will have somewhere between 20 and 60, depending on time of year and things like that. It varies, but we do very much to sort of make it a personal experience for each one. Everybody gets a chance to speak a little bit. They get to hear the speakers. Once the speakers, like Bill just mentioned, the young man finishes, we give them a chance to ask questions and to give comments. And of course, Zoom has this chat thing.
Yeah.
So a lot of them will just chat a comment, oh, thank you for your story, or hey, I wondered what kind of car you were driving. Or we don't judge the questions because we want to make the experience as meaningful as possible for them.
Yeah.
But it shows participation by the individual in what's going on. That's what the chat allows them to do. Instead of having to speak out, they can stick it on
I get it.
And pages of these chats are interesting to read because people are getting it when they put something down in print. That means that they're involved in the story of what we're doing with DWI Impact, and they understand the impact.
So we're having this conversation in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and you mentioned you get Zoom attendees from all over the state. Pretty much the law stops at the state border, isn't that right? I mean, New Mexico has its stuff, and Colorado its, and Texas that.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
And our program is key to the New Mexico law because the laws are a little different for DWI, or DUI is what it's called in other states. Mm-hmm. Predominantly only see people from New Mexico.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you in a minute how, if somebody is just, people listen to this podcast in their car by the thousands, and so about half of our listeners are in New Mexico, and about half are all over the world. We're in 40 countries now, about 500 cities.
Holy cow.
But if somebody's driving along in Albuquerque right now and says, man, I'd like to go on this Zoom and see what they're talking about, what's an easy to remember way you could tell somebody like that?
ImpactDWI.org.
Great. Say that again.
ImpactDWI.org.
Thank you.
That's and it's got a lot of resources on it, as well as information about the DWI panel, but there's instructions about how to go attend a panel. We charge a fee for the people who are required to go there for court, but if somebody wanted to just go and listen to one, that's fine, as long as willing to participate respectfully. They'd be welcome to join us and listen to one of these panels and hear people tell their stories.
This is a real peek behind the curtain at even somebody like me who's been to 10,000 recovery 12-step meetings. Somebody who doesn't do that might think that that's all that happens, behind that door in a meeting, and it's not. People are back there talking about money. They're talking about every aspect of life, but this is pretty focused on impact of driving while intoxicated from the standpoint of the person who's addicted and out there raising hell, and somebody who's having a nice day with their kid and gets plowed into and gets their family cut in half, and nothing's ever the same.
No, it's never the same. And it's never the same for me as an individual who took somebody to the Impact panel, who spoke.
You're talking about sponsoring this young man.
I'm talking about me now.
Okay.
I'm talking about me. Years later, from December, I go to the panel every month. I am committed to it. I need to hear that, and I need to be there as an evidence of a person of willing to support people that have gone through this.
As recovering addicts and alcoholics, nobody really wants to be an expert at the horrible shit we've been up to, but we've earned it. We can get the attention of somebody who maybe needs help in a way that maybe a doctor can't, or a preacher can't, or a well-meaning family member who says, you were drunk again last night. You got to knock that shit off. Well, you know how many thousands of times I was told I better knock that shit off, and nothing stuck until it was, it takes what it takes.
The addiction is on your shoulder at all time and says, I know that you told your wife that you wouldn't be drinking this week and all of that, but I'm your real friend. I'm the guy that you need to know that is supporting you at all times.
I want to get this in because we do 30-minute episodes and we're coming right up against the wall here. But one thing that I know personally and watching others is that alcoholics and addicts do not respond real well to threat of negative consequences. If you tell a drunk, you keep this up and you're going to lose your job at the factory, or if you keep this up, your wife's going to leave you, we'll turn that around and say, well, so what? I hate my job at the factory. I can live without her. How does that figure into what y'all do? Because you do expose people to negative consequences a lot. How does it go?
It goes much better because we don't judge them.
Right. I'm hearing that, guys.
We're there because we care for them. We let the stories speak for themselves. And in fact, as we've worked on this, we've toned the stories down, because one of the things we find is that one of those stories may be somebody's life who's in the audience.
Right.
And we could traumatize them.
That's right.
By bringing all that back. We've taken all the pictures of crashes and victims and everything. It's all just audio now when people tell their stories, because we don't want to get people too traumatized. Wow. And we really work at trying not to do that, because this is a group of people who the only way many of them have ever been able to deal with stress has been with alcohol.
Right.
And we don't want to drive them back into alcohol. So we work very, very hard to provide them with care and to not make it too hard, but to still get the story across. And we're really conscious of this as we counsel them. If you're coming out of this really upset, go find a friend and talk to them. And if you don't have a friend, New Mexico has a crisis line. It's 988. And you can talk immediately to a counselor any time of night or day on that line. So if you've got nowhere else to turn and you're upset, call 988, because they also have a peer warm line where you can talk to somebody in recovery who's been exactly where you are and can help do anything you're going to regret if you get upset at this.
And the website, again, if someone wants to find your Zoom meeting?
ImpactDWI.org.
And when are the meetings?
We typically do the English meeting the first Wednesday of every month at 6 p.m. because we work around people's work schedule.
Mountain time, yeah.
Mountain Standard Time right now.
Yeah.
And it's a couple hours long. Just let us know as you come on that you're a visitor, and we will make sure that you have all the access everybody else has. You may not have time to speak like everybody else does in telling what happened to them, but you're welcome to come and listen.
One last time. Go to where?
ImpactDWI.org.
I'm going to finish on that so it's clear in people's heads if they're trying to memorize it while they dive for a pen. Thank you guys for what you do. Bill, people like you and me should not drink.
We don't.
That's a wrap.